From a fan favorite getting one too many chances to an exciting prospect ending up with a life sentence, these are the fighters whose reputations were destroyed. Fighters have been working tirelessly to show the world they're more than just some brutes that just love to fight, but some actually do quite the opposite. Our first fighter is none other than the controversial Nick Diaz. With an impressive career and a never-back-down attitude, Nick had all the makings of a true legend. However, his own actions and behavior outside the ring ultimately tarnished his legacy. Nick Diaz's MMA career will forever be remembered for his hostile relationship with the press, accusations of dishonesty towards UFC president Dana White, and his ongoing substance abuse issues. Despite his undeniable talent and passion for the sport, these factors cast a dark shadow over all his in-ring accomplishments. One of the most notable incidents in Nick's career was his suspension following a positive test for marijuana after his fight against Anderson Silva at UFC 183. This wasn't his first brush with controversy, not by a long shot, although it certainly marked a turning point, leading to a lengthy suspension and damaging his reputation in the eyes of many fans. With his career plagued by scandals, many turned against Diaz over the years, questioning his commitment to the sport and his ability to act as a role model for aspiring fighters. Nick Diaz had the potential to be a true MMA legend, but unfortunately, his own actions have led to a tarnished legacy that will forever be marred by controversy. And continuing on with the theme of tarnished legacies, we turn our attention to the legendary Wanderlei Silva. A titan in the world of mixed martial arts, Wanderlei's reputation took a massive hit when he became embroiled in a drug test controversy before his much-anticipated fight against Chael Sonnen at UFC 175 in 2014. This long-awaited bout had already been delayed multiple times due to Silva's injuries, but was finally set for UFC 175. However, things took a turn for the worse when it came to light that Silva had not only failed to apply for a license to fight, but had also purposely dodged a random out-of-competition drug test. When drug testing officials showed up at Silva's home, he didn't answer the door. Later, at his gym, he continued to evade them and eventually fled through a side door. "We got a runner." UFC President Dana White later remarked that this was the worst thing you could do. The Nevada State Athletic Commission came down hard on Silva, initially banning him for life. While this decision was eventually overturned, his reputation was well and truly destroyed. After his ban, he launched a series of angry YouTube rants targeting the UFC, accusing them of fight fixing and mistreating athletes. In early 2016, he issued an apology and was subsequently released from his UFC contract. But we're not done yet with the Wanderlei and Chael Sonnen fiasco. Our next fighter is none other than Sonnen himself, a fighter whose final years in the sport were a wild roller coaster that crashed and burned in the summer of 2014. The catalyst for this dramatic downfall was the revelation that he had failed not once, but 2 random drug tests in the lead-up to his UFC 175 against Wanderlei Silva. The situation was shocking, especially considering that just weeks prior, Sonnen had mocked Silva for evading a drug test. But the results of his own tests showed that Sonnen was, in essence, a walking pharmacy. He tested positive for HGH, EPO, HCG, and anastrozole, leading to a 2-year suspension. Sonnen's past was already checkered, including a previous steroid suspension. Still, this latest scandal proved to be the last straw. And soon after these events, Sonnen announced his retirement from the sport. Although his suspension has since ended, he has stated that he has no intention of returning to the ring. And someone who never was allowed a return to a UFC octagon is our next fighter, Paul Daly. This hard-hitting athlete quickly made a name for himself in the UFC, with 2 stoppage wins due to his powerful strikes. But it all came crashing down around him when a moment of madness in the octagon led to his swift and brutal fall from grace. In 2010, Daly fought Josh Koscheck in the co-main event of UFC 113. After being dominated on the mat for 3 rounds, Daly's frustrations reached a boiling point, and he sucker-punched Koscheck after the final bell. UFC President Dana White was quick to respond, banning Daly for life and labeling his actions as the worst conduct I have ever seen in the UFC. Despite repeated requests from fans over the years to give Daly a second chance, White has remained steadfast in his decision. The once promising career of Paul Daly in the UFC came to an abrupt and shocking end due to a single impulsive act of aggression, and his reputation was destroyed in a matter of seconds. Another in-ring issue that destroyed the reputation of a promising fighter is the submission expert Josimar Palhares. His exceptional ability to catch opponents in leg locks is well known, but he has a troubling tendency not to release his limb-wrecking holds, even when the referee is literally trying to pull him off them. This guy is a savage. This character flaw was well known to have landed Palhares in trouble, even before he joined the UFC. Some people just never learn. In 2010, at UFC 111, he ignored Tomas Traval's frantic tapping and the referee's command to release the hold, resulting in a 90-day suspension. Upon returning to action, Palhares continued to push the boundaries of acceptable behavior. In 2013, after serving another suspension for elevated testosterone levels, Toquinho was back at it again. He left Mike Pierce in excruciating pain, holding on to a heel hook submission several seconds after Pierce tapped out and disregarding the referee's orders. Like, come on! It's clear he just wants to hurt people at this point. The UFC's patience had finally worn thin, and they cut Palhares from the promotion the next day. Astonishingly, he still hasn't learned his lesson, as he received a 2-year suspension in 2015 for holding a Kimura submission too long against Jake Shields in WSOF. But our exploration of fallen fighters doesn't end here. MMA legend Mirko "Cro Cop" Filipovic is one of the iconic fighters that struck fear into people all over the world. But after a disappointing first stint in the UFC, he decided to return several years later in an attempt to redeem himself. Unfortunately, this decision would ultimately tarnish his much-beloved reputation. Things initially seemed promising, as Cro Cop made a triumphant return by avenging a notorious UFC loss to Gabriel Gonzaga. If the 41-year-old had retired after that victory, his reputation would have remained unblemished. But he chose to accept a headline fight against Anthony Hamilton in South Korea. Just over 2 weeks before the bout, Cro Cop was subjected to a random drug test by US ADA. Later that day, he contacted the UFC and confessed to using the banned substance HGH, which he claimed was an attempt to help heal a shoulder injury. A few days later, he made the same confession on his own website and announced his retirement from the sport. Despite his decision to retire, Cro Cop was still officially suspended for 2 years, marking a disappointing end to the career of one of the greats of the Pride era, and hurting his overall reputation and legacy, from the honorable to the much more dishonorable. Our final fighter has little redemption left. We're talking about Jonathan Paul Copenhaver, also known as War Machine. Although he was never considered a legend, War Machine had built a reputation for being an exciting fighter, climbing the ranks in the MMA world with his action-packed bouts. His time in the UFC and Bellator was filled with exciting fights, but any favorability he had would come to an abrupt end in 2014. War Machine was found guilty of assaulting his former wife, Christy Mack. He was sentenced to life in prison for his horrific actions, including kidnapping, domestic battery, and other despicable acts, effectively erasing any remnants of his MMA legacy. As a result, he joins our list of fighters whose reputations were destroyed by a single event or controversy. In the world of combat sports, the actions of these fighters serve as stark reminders that one moment or decision can change a career forever. So, from an exciting prospect ending up with a life sentence to a fan favorite having one too many chances, this was fighters' reputations who were destroyed.